Ever since that run to the national championship in 2014, the Oregon Ducks have always been this close to breaking back into the college football playoff field. And if not for a couple losses to the Washington Huskies last year, they probably would have done so. However, now entering the Big Ten Conference, Oregon is up to the task and they have built an incredible roster ready to win a national championship in 2024. So can Oregon go get the program's first ever national title? You're about to find out my thoughts here in this video. What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today, and welcome to Prediction Season Team 4 out of 134. Yes, that's right. I'm doing all 134 FBS level college football teams this summer. It means I'm doing your favorite team, so hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you know when your team has a video on my channel, and thank you so much for watching this video. Help support my channel in more ways than you can even imagine, and if you want to help support my channel in more ways than just by watching or subscribing, you can like, you can comment, you can share, and anything you do to interact with the channel helps support what I do here on YouTube, and I greatly appreciate each and every one of you for helping me out with that. But enough about me out of the way. You're here to see me talk about Oregon football in 2024. How do we do predictions this year? I'm glad you asked. We're going to dive on into the team's offense, dive on into the defense, and then we'll take a look at each and every game on the Oregon Ducks Big Ten football schedule, and we'll give it a game-by-game preview and prediction. So without further ado, let's talk about Oregon in 2024. A couple footnotes before we do. The stats from last year are going to be posted right there for your viewing pleasure. That was how the team performed both offensively and defensively last year. You'll see the defensive stats when we talk about the defense. And for your viewing pleasure, the coaching staff for each team is right below, the coaching staff for the Oregon Ducks is right below the team's logo there. Again, you'll get both offensive and defensive sides. You got to start with the offense by talking about the most important position on the field, and that is the quarterback room. Before we do that, though, I just got to slide this in here. This was a very explosive offense last season. It was the best offense in the country, and there's no doubt in my mind about that. Over 530 yards per game, over 40 points per game. They could do it through the air. They could do it on the ground. They were one of the best teams on third down offensively. This Oregon team was built for success in the postseason. They just didn't happen to get to the college football playoff. A couple losses to the Huskies prevented them from doing so. However, this is the team that's ready and built for success offensively again in 2024, even though they did lose Bo Nix to the NFL draft. 4,508 yards, 45 touchdowns, and 3 picks on 77% completion percentage, as well as a guy that had 6 rushing touchdowns. Yeah, that is really, really hard to try to fill in those shoes. Ty Thompson's going to be gone through the portal, but enter Dillon Gabriel. Last season as an Oklahoma Sooner, 3,660 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions on 69% completion percentage, and had a career year rushing the football and being able to get out of the pocket and create plays. In 93 tries, 373 yards with 12 touchdowns. I believe sack yardage is affected into those numbers as well. They do get Dante Moore from UCLA, but it's all about Dillon Gabriel. He's an exceptionally talented player in a gifted offensive system. He's going to thrive and excel in Eugene, Oregon. What are some of the weapons that he's going to have around him? Well, he sadly will not have Bucky Irving. A 1,000-yard rusher from last year is gone to play on Sundays, as he has 1,180 yards from last year, 11 touchdowns. However, you do get another 11 touchdown man back to the team this year in James Jordan. He had 759 yards, 7.1 yards per carry last year. Whittington, Lamar are going to be coming back. And how about this guy? A Division II transfer coming over from Northwest Missouri State. It's Jay Harris, over 1,400 yards with the Bearcats last season. He is going to be a huge player in this running back room. Oregon, by the way, does lose Dante Dowdle in the transfer portal. They do lose their top receiver from last year, Troy Franklin, 1,383 yards, 14 touchdowns. He's gone to the NFL. Hudson and Cozart, a couple depth pieces that'll leave through the portal. But Tez Johnson was another 1,000-yard receiver that will be returning, 1,182 yards and 10 touchdowns for him. Trayshawn Holden, Gary Bryant will also return, as well as Oregon gets a huge piece from the transfer portal in former Texas A&M Aggie Evan Stewart to bulk up this wide receiver room. An exceptionally talented player that hasn't broken out on the stat sheet yet. He could very well do so with Dillon Gabriel as his quarterback in this Will Steen offensive system. You return your top tight end Terrence Ferguson, Patrick Herbert, and Kenyon Sadiq come back after Casey Kelly left the tight end room through the transfer portal. And even though you lose Jackson Powers Johnson on the offensive line, a couple really good players do come back. Connerly and Harper will lead this offensive line. And you do get Matthew Bradford coming in here as well. He is coming over by way of Indiana. And he definitely could be a starting. He definitely could have a starting spot on this offensive line, along with guys like Lalulu, as well as a Johnny Cornelius. Apologies for any mispronunciations that I may have. Let's talk about this offense in 2024. I think it's going to be another high-powered, explosive type offense. Dylan Gabriel's absolutely the quarterback that you wanted to come in and fill those shoes for Bo Nix. His final year of college eligibility is going to, I think, in his final year of college eligibility, I think he's going to shine. He's got some great tailbacks behind him, a phenomenal pass catching room, and Gabriel has all the tools, all the mechanics, and all the weapons needed to explode. Could possibly have his first 4,000-yard season in his final year as a collegiate college football player. We'll go ahead and dive on into the defense here, and it was a defense that was very, very good last season. It held teams to under 18 points per game, 16.5 points per game to be exact. I don't know why I picked 18, but they held opponents to only 16.5 points per game, 318 yards per game, and if not for just being outmatched physicality-wise on the offensive side and not being able to slow down the Washington Huskies, this defense stopped pretty much everybody else. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the players that will be leaving this defense. Before we talk about some of the players coming back, we'll start out with the defensive line. Brandon Dolis, Taki Tiamani, Casey Rogers, and Popo Almave are all going to be gone off the defensive line. They're all now going to be playing on Sundays, which is crazy because none of the four of them were the most productive defensive linemen out of the players that played for Oregon last season. I mean, Dorless, don't get me wrong, really good player. 5 sacks last year. I believe Casey Rogers added 2 or 3 sacks last season. But Jordan Birch, who had, 34 tackles, 3 sacks last season. Mateo Uyunglele, who had a couple sacks, and Kenyon Ware-Hudson will be coming back to highlight this defensive line room. And you get a couple really talented transfers coming over as well. Jamari Caldwell and Derek Harmon. Caldwell coming over from Houston. Derek Harmon coming over from Michigan State. Both of them 4-star rated transfers, according to 24/7, as well as a ton of freshmen to just keep bulking up this defensive line. Aiden Breland and Jericho Johnson are the 2 that are listed on the depth chart, according to ourlads.com. However, Elijah Rushing is an edge-type player that will be coming in. He could definitely be playing kind of a hybrid defensive line linebacker position if he does indeed get playing time, but he was the number 1 overall player in the state of Arizona, and Oregon was able to snag him in the 2024 recruiting class. Linebacker room is going to be really, really good this year. Again, even though Jamal Hill and Mase Funa are going to be gone, both those guys combined for quick math here, 52 tackles, as well as 3 sacks last season. Again, those are both of those numbers clicked together. Jeffrey Bassa is going to come back, as well as Justin Jacobs, Devin Jackson, and Tatum Tuioti. This is a phenomenal linebacker room. Bassa, 71 tackles last season. You move all the way down to Jacobs, 32 tackles. He contributed a sack last year. Tuioti, 29 tackles and 2 sacks. And just some really good players in this linebacker room. I don't think this Oregon linebacker room is going to miss a beat. I think they're going to be really, really good. Defensive back-wise, Kyrie Jackson is now going to be playing on Sundays. 34 tackles, 7 passes defended, 3 picks last season. Martin and Bridges, some players that leave through the transfer portal. However, Jaleel Florence and Dante Manning come back to this cornerback room, but they felt like they were lacking at that position. So what do? They go get a boost. Cam Alexander comes over from UTSA, very good player over there for the Roadrunners, as well as Jabbar Muhammad. Oh, where does that name sound? Oh yeah, he was on the team that beat Oregon twice last year. Now coming over to play for Oregon, he's going to be an exceptional corner, as he was for the Washington Huskies last season. Evan Williams is off from the safety position to go play on Sundays. That was your leading tackler last year, and they love to use him to get pressure to the quarterback. 82 tackles, 4.5 sacks for him last season. Steve Stevens IV, he did graduate, as well as Brian Addison entering the transfer portal. Tysheem Johnson and Nico Red are some guys that are going to be coming back. Johnson was 70 tackles, 7 pass defended, 2 interceptions last year. Red, another really good player, but again, they just felt like they needed more, so they added more transfers. Kobe Savage from Kansas State. Brandon Johnson, I believe, is by way of Duke, and then Peyton Woodyard by way of the Alabama Crimson Tide, as well as a freshman in Aaron Flowers that comes in and the 102nd overall rated player, 7th rated overall safety in the class of 2024, according to 24/7 Sports. And kickers are people, too. Let's show them some love. Camden Lewis graduated, but James Ross, that punter, is coming back. Grant Metters is back as well. As a transfer from Oregon State, Atticus Sappington will come in to try to help with some of the kicking duties here. Talking about this Oregon defense overall, it's going to be, I think, a really good defensive backroom, a ton of very talented transfers with Alexander Muhammad, Savage Johnson, and Woodyard. I believe there's one or two others here that maybe aren't going to get as much playing time as those five, but this is an Oregon team that just continues to stack up their defensive roster, and they probably needed to do so with now joining the Big Ten Conference. This defense is going to be physical, it's going to be hard-hitting, it's going to create turnovers, and it's going to give opposing offenses a ton of trouble, especially with that defensive front seven. And some of the transfers, some of the freshmen that they added are going to be superb players. This Oregon defense, while they had really good statistical numbers last year, should see a jump in those numbers here in 2024, which does sound crazy to say. Let's look at the Oregon schedule in 2024. Any game that's underlined is going to be a home game, while any game on the road will be in italics or that slanted text. Any game that gets highlighted in green is a game I see Oregon being able to win fairly easily. Any game in yellow is, okay, don't sleep on that game. It could be a close one there for Oregon, but I still see them being able to win. But red, of course, is any loss. Should be no problem here for the Oregon Ducks. In week one, they will be able to slaughter the Idaho Vandals, who, don't get it twisted, were one of the better teams in the FCS ranks last year, but Oregon is a top 5 team in the FBS ranks, and Dylan Gabriel's going to have none of that. The Vandals will go down to the Oregon Ducks, as will the Boise State Broncos. Now, you got to be careful with this game here. If it was on blue turf, it would be a little bit more dangerous for Oregon. Boise State's going to be one of the top teams in the group of 5 ranks this season. They are not to be counted out, I should say they are not to be taken lightly. Boise State's going to be a very good team. They have a lot of phenomenally talented playmakers, especially in that running back room there. But they are still going to be no match for Oregon. Oregon will win the week 2 matchup there. We still get Oregon and Oregon State this year, and it is very sad to say that Oregon State is just not going to be as good as they were last season. Everybody off that team is gone. Silas Bolden, we talked about him in the last video. He is off to Texas. The quarterback, DJU, nope, off to Florida State. Damian Martinez, he is off to Miami, along with a ton of defensive weapons. I just don't see Oregon State living up to what the Oregon Ducks are capable of in 2024. Yes, it is a rivalry game. Yes, Oregon State will be motivated, but Oregon is supremely talented. Give me the Ducks to win that one. Before they dive into the Big Ten schedule after their first bye week of the season, again, every team gets 2 bye weeks this year. Their first one comes after the Oregon State game and before their first Big Ten conference game. Well, it doesn't necessarily feel like a Big Ten conference game quite yet because you're playing a familiar Pac-12 foe in UCLA that I think Oregon will be able to win. UCLA is losing a ton of pieces from last year as well. The head coaching situation is really interesting with UCLA, and there's just a ton of turnover in that program. I don't necessarily see UCLA being that good in 2024, and while they could be competitive for a quarter, maybe a quarter and a half, Oregon will end up pulling away at the end. Same sort of situation here with the Michigan State Spartans. Now, this is not a situation where I doubt this head coach. I love Jonathan Smith, and he has seen this Oregon Ducks team time in and time out as the former head coach of the Oregon State Beavers. However, I just don't think he has the roster needed to compete with Oregon. Michigan State lost a lot of pieces through the transfer portal, especially defensively, which was their biggest strength, especially on that defensive line. One of them, in Derek Harmon, is now playing for Dan Lanning and Oregon. I just see Oregon being able to roll through that one, and then the big one comes. Ohio State and Oregon in Autzen Stadium, rematch of the 2014 National Championship game, rematch of the game in the Horseshoe in 2021. The Buckeyes are going to be looking to take some revenge there in that game. And look, for all intensive purposes here, this is probably game of the year. This is going to be a top 5 battle. It's going to be a hard hitting game. And while Oregon may have the more explosive offense here, I'd like to lean on the defensive edge with Ohio State, which I think will be the difference here in this game. The Buckeyes returned a lot of supremely talented defensive players, along with adding Caleb Downs, who led Alabama in tackles last season. And the physicality level of this Buckeye defense has increased year in and year out. And with a lot of the offensive talent they have here on this team, Henderson and Judkins, and this wide receiver room that we know has immense potential that is going to start exploding by this point, I think whoever happens to play quarterback, probably going to end up being Will Howard, will do enough to lead the Buckeyes to a win on the road in Autzen Stadium, handing Oregon their first loss of the 2024 season. And I think the Buckeye defense steps up and makes a couple of huge plays that help seal the game on the road. What a matchup that's going to be. It's a game that Oregon can win. It's just not what I'm predicting. I think the Buckeyes will walk in there and beat the Oregon Ducks. However, Oregon will recover. They will go on the road and beat the Purdue Boilermakers, while Ryan Walter's squad should be better this year. Nowhere near what they need to be to compete with Oregon. Same thing with the Illinois Fighting Illini. I really do like Brett Bielema's team, but again, just no match for the Oregon Ducks. The Ducks will win that game. Okay, now you go into the game in the Big House against Michigan, and this is another spot here where I think Oregon is going to trip up. Or I kind of misspoke there. I don't think Oregon is going to trip up there, so I'll correct my mistake right now by highlighting that game in yellow. I think Oregon is going to win this game, but I think it's going to be very, very close. I think Michigan's defense is going to surprise Oregon a little bit here. Michigan plays with such physicality on the defensive side. I just don't love what they have on the offensive end, and I think that'll lead to Oregon being able to get that win. Oregon should be able to beat Maryland there. Maryland's defense has been the struggle of this team for many, many years, and Oregon's got too many good offensive weapons. Wisconsin is another interesting one here, and while this one could get really interesting, a possible trap game right before your final bye week and the final game of the regular season, I see Oregon being able to go on the road, beat Wisconsin's new quarterback in Tyler Van Dyke. I think Luke Fickell is going to be able to find some things that work a little bit better for him in year 2 in Madison. It will not be enough to beat the high-powered offense of the Oregon Ducks, even with how good of a defense we know Wisconsin can play. Give me the Ducks to win that game against Wisconsin. And then the final game here, you get to keep the rivalry against Washington. And for those 2 losses last year, Oregon gets revenge. Kalen DeBoer has gone over to Alabama, and that roster is absolutely decimated. Now, while they still have some very good players, including Will Rogers, who will probably end up being that quarterback, Washington is not built to compete with Oregon like they were last season, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which is what helped them beat Oregon those past couple of times last season, being able to come up with some big defensive plays. So the lone loss for Oregon I have to the Ohio State Buckeyes, meaning 11-1 with an 8-1 conference record, is where I see Oregon finishing this year. Now, whether the loss comes to Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, or maybe even Washington, I think they do end up dropping one game here, but no more. Oregon is going to be an exceptionally talented team this season. If the floor bottoms out, I mean, maybe 10-2, but this team is primed for a playoff berth, and they're going to have a great chance to go win the program's first national championship. Let me know your thoughts on the Ducks in the comment section below. Alabama is on the chopping block next. Remember to play hard but tailgate harder, and I'll see all you guys in the next video. Goodbye.